Imam, assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah.
Once again, thank you so much for these incredible sessions. We have been exploring the arguments against God, the challenges that people of faith face, and I'm reminded in particular of one gentleman who he's decided that his life is meaningless. He lives his life in this way. And I've spoken to him many times, lives in a Muslim family. He comes to the masjid, etc. But he just has come to this conclusion that nothing he does matters. That his choices are not actually choices. That his life is actually meaningless, purposeless, and that he is just like a leaf floating in the wind. And this thought seems to cause him so much anguish and so much sorrow. And yet he cannot shake this thought. And I feel like there might be others who struggle with this idea of choice and free will.
And people who struggle with that, many of them without the proper understanding, they actually end up losing their faith.
Yeah, so why is this such an important issue, the idea of God's will and man's will and how they might play together or contradict each other? Why does this seem to actually cause people struggles in their faith?
I mean, if you pit the will of the creator of heavens and earth with the will of the human being against each other, it's either that they will clash or one of them will simply just do away with the other. And so, think of it this way. This is why this is such a serious matter. And if not addressed properly, it can really extinguish the flame of faith from the heart very, very quickly. So when you think of God, you think of the Lord Himself, Allah, the creator of heavens and earth, the omnipotent, the omniscient, the omnipresent, the all-powerful, the all-knowing, the one that is capable of anything and everything. It is unfathomable that anything would happen in the universe of God, that God created, without His permission and His leave.
This is fine, this is normal.
100%. But if everything in the universe happens only with God's leave, then what is the point of human beings making any choices then? Then that basically, according to this understanding, it would rid the human being completely, of agency. And there would be no point in doing anything like, the gentleman that you're describing. Whatever I do, God already sanctioned it, and God already gave His permission, and God is the one that did it, essentially, not me. On the other hand, if you argue that, no, that's actually not true, human beings are in control of their own actions, everything that happens is a reflection of our free will, then that leaves us with a question, then what is the point of God? What is the point of prayer? What is the point of seeking help from God? Does God really exist then? And does His existence matter if I'm in control of all of my choices? And so these two extreme perspectives, seem to be like the flip sides of the same coin, and that leads a lot of people to lose their faith, essentially.
So if man does have will, then it relegates God to be a spectator God, and maybe even leads people to question if there is God at all. On the other hand, if it is God's will that everything is by God's decree, then how am I supposed to be judged for anything that I do? How can any of my actions be actions that I'm accountable for?
Well, what is the point of accountability? What is the point of heaven and hell? What is the point of good and evil? Right? Evil people do what they do because God willed for those actions to happen. And good people did that not because they're kind and good and they deserve heaven, but because God caused them to do it. So what's the point?
Right. So this is a problem, particularly for those who believe in and are committed to the idea of an all-powerful, all-knowing God. Right. This God that knows everything,
which is
in control.
Pretty much all people of faith, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So how are we supposed to reconcile this? This seems to be a problem for people of faith in particular.
It's actually a problem for people with no faith as well, right? Fatalism, which seems to be the inevitable outcome of this thought process, is not only something that people of faith experience, and then this conversation, I think, is intended to resolve this dilemma, but also atheists. Anyone that subscribes to the philosophy of naturalism.
But atheists are these are the champions of free will, that we get to do whatever we want and no one is in control of our actions. How can they?
So
be
they
subject to
think,
this issue?
those of them without enough knowledge. But naturalists, pure naturalists, philosophic naturalists,
Right.
would concede to the fact that if there is no God, then we are all the products of the evolutionary process, and we came from preceding contingent events, and all those events basically have their roots in the stardust. And so we do what we do today, not because we choose to do it, but because we must do it, because it is our predisposition to do that thing, and that predisposition exists in the particular combination of particles in the stardust that made us who we are today. In fact, I would say that atheism and naturalism provide the absolute most frightening form of fatalism, significantly worse than any fatalism that comes from religion.
Okay, if atheism leads to fatalism and theistic perspectives lead to fatalism, why don't we just buy it? Why don't we just accept fatalism?
Well, we shouldn't accept fatalism. And fatalism in and of itself it poses all kinds of intellectual dilemmas that simply cannot be reconciled. And I venture to say that Islamic theology offered us very, very useful tools that will help reconcile these seemingly irreconcilable ideas.
The reason I say that is just because it seems like an incredibly unfair question, a question far beyond our ability to comprehend. Man's choice versus God's choice. And what does it mean, God's choice? We can barely even comprehend the physical laws of this universe and the black hole or simple things that we are observing within this realm. And now we're supposed to somehow understand God's choice and God's will?
That's a great point. And here's the thing. We are only familiar with the happenings and the occurrences, the laws of this universe of ours, this observable universe, this physical reality in which we all exist. If God exists, then God does not belong to this physical reality. And therefore, God's wisdom is only fathomable to man to the extent that God summarized that wisdom in human words that we are able to understand and process. Words that are very, very, very limited. When God says that He understands He knows our future choices, the word future is problematic because the word future as it's used here in this world means one thing, but there's no past, present, and future for God, for example, because it does not experience time. And I want to talk about this extensively a little bit later. And I use an example, and I use that example with my students all the time, which is the example of the fish tank. And this is really important to lay the ground for the conversation today.
This is an example for our experience. The fish tank is an
the fish tank will tell us a lot about our own experience as human beings in this universe. And in the fish tank example, right, so there is this man that owns the fish tank. And I think many people own fish tanks, right? So there is the fish in the tank, and then there is the owner of the fish tank.
Right.
The world inside the fish tank is made of very basic things. It's made of water. That water has oxygen, has nutrients, has minerals. That water also has food crumbs that the fish consume. It also has fish that seems to be constantly moving in this circular direction.
Right.
It may have some plants here and there, maybe a couple of a couple of light fixtures, little colors, but there's like 7-8 things, and that's all there is in the fish tank. Right. So very finite things. But if you look at the world outside the fish tank, I mean, there's a million things. There's the fish tank owner. There is his wife, his kids, his car, his pet. There is his land. There is his CPA, his attorney. There is his taxes, his car, and the complexity of his car, and the engine in his car. And his wife wants him to buy a Tesla because gas prices are so high. And then he reads the news, and there is the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and then there's the Arab-Israeli conflict. There's theological matters, and there's complex things, and philosophy, and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
The fish in the tank only know what's in the tank, and they know nothing about what's outside the tank. In fact, not only that they don't know anything outside the tank, they don't have the intellectual capacity to understand anything that happens outside the tank because they were not given the faculty of understanding. Their brains are very, very small. And so imagine that the fish is trying to understand what happens outside the tank.
It's trying to understand the Arab-Israeli conflict.
It's trying to understand the Arab-Israeli conflict or the difference between the internal combustion engine and the electric car.
Or where the food comes from.
There is absolutely no way that it could understand. The absolute maximum that the fish may understand is that there's a caretaker that exists outside the tank that gives us crumbs once in a while.
Right.
How, where, what, we have no idea.
Right.
And so I use that analogy to try to help us understand the limitations of our knowledge. As human beings who live on this earth, what do we know really? And we don't even know who built the pyramids, and
right.
I'm of Egyptian descent myself, and I have no idea who built the pyramids.
You didn't do it, huh?
It wasn't me.
Okay.
It wasn't even my ancestors, I don't think. And so we don't know if it was an alien species, or we don't know if it was,
all kinds of conspiracy
Hebrew slaves or whatever, all these
right.
theories, right? We don't know what antimatter is. We don't know what's in the black holes. Even within the physical universe, like half of the human brain is unmapped.
Right.
What do we know really about our own world in order for us to understand God's wisdom, God's intentions, God's will, why God does whatever He does? I think that would be an overreach for us to try to understand things that we don't have the intellectual faculties to understand.
Right. And there are rules, there are parameters to this so-called fish tank, or parameters to our experience in the universe that are a key part of the limitation of our experience.
100%. And I would say one of the most important rules of that fish tank that we need to understand in this conversation is time.
Time is one of the most important rules.
Right. Why? Because at the Big Bang, a lot of people are familiar with how the universe was created and so forth and came to existence. Space and matter basically came to existence when the Big Bang took place. But a lot of people forget that it was also time that took place, at the Big Bang. And so the fish is swimming in water. It doesn't mean that the owner of the fish tank swims in water. The owner, in fact, the fish has no understanding whatsoever. The fish have no understanding whatsoever of what it means to exist without water.
Right.
Because they're constantly breathed through their gills. Does that mean, the owner of the fish tank breathes through gills as well? Obviously not.
Silly.
So think of the analogy this way. Time is a creation. Time is a factor. Time is a limitation that exists only in the fish tank, i.e. the universe. We experience time like we're swimming in time and matter every single second of every single day. It doesn't mean that God is subject to such limitations. God is beyond that, which also means that a reduction of sorts had to take place. A summarizing of sorts had to take place.
A translation, perhaps.
A translation, exactly. That's a good word. For God to be able to relay divine wisdom in the medium of finite human language, so that the fish in the tank are able to understand.
Examples of that finite human language. You're talking about like the idea of before or after.
Or future or present, or I will reward you by putting you in heaven. Even heaven and hell, these are concepts that exist beyond the universe, beyond the timeline, beyond the limitations of physics, beyond space, matter, and time.
Right, because we hear that people will be in heaven infinitely, for example, and what does that mean?
Great question. If you remove time from the equation, then immortality and infinity starts to make sense, right? That is an extremely important point to make here. Men and women of faith, they always adhere to the Aristotelian notion of the immutability of God. God is the absolute perfection. Therefore, there is no form to which God is going to change or evolve or transform.
Right.
And so when God says in the scriptures that He loves, or He feels happy, or He feels angry, or that God creates,
right.
If that happens within the timeline, then it would require a change in the essence of God. But if God is removed from the timeline, then change, the way we understand it, is different than change, in the realm of God. So the idea of time actually helps so much. When someone lives in heaven for eternity, for example, that would make a lot more sense if time is not a factor, if time is not a limitation. And so this groundwork is important for us to be able to understand really predestination and fatalism, God's choice versus man's choice as it's understood in the Islamic tradition.
When we talked about evolution in one of the other conversations, we did resort to Christian paradigms, and we also resorted to Islamic paradigms to help us understand this. Are there some paradigms that we can resort to?
Like I said, Islamic theological paradigms offered us extremely helpful tools and instruments to understand the complexity, or at least overcome the complexity of man's free choice versus God's creative agency. Mm-hmm. And two of the most important concepts that, as we said earlier, were the concepts of qada and qadr.
Qada and qadr.
And these, like I said, these are concepts that are known by the average Muslim. They don't require a doctorate degree in theology. They are as known to the average Muslim as the 5 daily prayers. So, the concepts of qada and qadr both shed a tremendous amount of light on this complexity.
These are concepts that we learn. Even the Sunday school child will be taught these ideas. Mm-hmm. Perhaps maybe not in a thorough enough way, though, because I think perhaps many people think that qada and qadr might be the same thing. Can we spend some time identifying and defining them first?
They absolutely are not, and let's go ahead and define them, because I think this is necessary. So what is qada? Qada means divine decree. Mm-hmm. And that means basically the divine irresistible laws, his master plan of the entire universe, the inviolable boundaries of God, basically. Mm-hmm. They don't bend for anyone, they don't change for anyone, and they certainly limit man's free will every single day. And quite honestly, we're okay with that. We experience it every day, and we have no problem with it whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, this is qada, these are the unchanging, perhaps like the laws of the universe, physics, genetics.
All the cosmological constants, mm-hmm. The laws of physics, my genetic makeup, my race, the fact that I'm not white or black, the fact that I'm not Chinese, the parents that I was born to, mm-hmm. The fact that I'm a human being, therefore I don't have wings to fly. Right. I have to breathe oxygen from air and not through gills. Right? It's basically all the factors of the fish tank, right, that the fish cannot change.
Right, the rules of the fish tank that are unchanging.
It's the unchanging rules of the fish tank. That is the meaning of qada.
And the relationship between qada and free will, man's free will, is what exactly? It does what to free will? It
suspends man's free will. I may climb up the staircase and stand on the 10th floor, mm-hmm.
Of
an apartment building, and say, what? It is my free will, my desire to fly like a bird.
Right.
If I actually try to flap my arms, I will literally just fall down and break my neck. Yeah. So I had a will to do something, but the rules of qada superseded my will.
Right.
And that happens every single day. It is inescapable.
Unforgiving rules, absolutely. And so then there is qadr, which is different than qada.
Yeah, qadr is the divine fine-tuning of human affairs. It's more microscopic, it's more involved, and it is in a constant change of flux and change and evolution and transformation every single day. It's about apportioning, it's about creating tests, mm-hmm. and trials and tribulations that generate finite choices for human beings. Mm-hmm. And so God will impose a test, and this test will create a set of choices, not an infinite number, but rather a finite number of choices, and the human being is then left to select from this set of choices whichever one that human being wants to select.
You said a test, like a tragedy, like a difficult situation. What do you mean by a test?
It doesn't have to be. It could literally be the blossoming of the spring flowers in your backyard. It could be a beautiful cloud that you saw, in the morning, and then, someone had to pull over and take a picture, mm-hmm. and then there is a sequence of events that will take place as a result of someone pulling over to the side of the highway in order to take a picture of a beautiful cloud, for example.
Had they not pulled over, there'd be a different sequence of
Exactly,
events.
for them and for other people as well. And so, there's another example that I actually use with my students in order to demonstrate the point of qadr that I think would be effective in this context, and that is the example of the hummingbird. And so you woke up in the morning, you prayed Fajr, and you had breakfast, and now you're having your morning coffee before you go to work.
I prefer chai, by the way. So
that's your loss. But then you step to the backyard, and you just want to take a little morning breeze before you get your car and go to work, and so you're holding your cup of coffee or chai, and then you're standing in the backyard and looking at the trees, and suddenly you see this hummingbird.
Yeah.
And you're so captivated by the hummingbird because it's not very common to see it. It's a beautiful bird, and so that moment, the hummingbird showing up in your backyard, that is a test.
Right.
And that test created, let's say, 3 choices for you. It's usually a lot more than that, but I'm just going to say for the sake of demonstration, it generated 3 choices for you. Choice number 1. Freeze and keep looking at the hummingbird and be so amazed by the hummingbird, and take it all in spiritually and say subhanallah 33 times, right, which took you 5 minutes. Choice number 2, be so amazed, and then put the coffee mug aside and grab your phone and take pictures and post on Instagram and spend the next half hour with people, don't leave before you say subhanallah, and then people engaging us. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen, and they'll be like, isn't it? This is so awesome, and then it just creates a social media conversation that took you half an hour.
Right.
Remember, options A and B will cause you to be late to work in varying degrees.
Right.
Option number 3, this is so awesome, subhanallah, but I really have to go to work. So you decide to go to your car and actually drive to work.
Right.
And so while the mere appearance of the hummingbird generated choices, and all those choices came from God, none of them is my responsibility. They all came from God. God guided this hummingbird to come and arrive in my backyard at that particular moment, and accordingly, that generated 3 choices for me. Which of these choices will be selected? That is now up to me. So you see this conglomeration of God's agency and human agency coming together in order to generate choices, but the selection of those choices is up to man. It's up to the human
somebody
being.
might protest and say, well, yes, but God already knew the choice I was going to make, so is it really a choice?
Again, you're still making committing the fallacy of assuming that God exists within the timeline. Remember, if you're talking about another human being, it would be problematic if that human being knew your future choices. But since God is not in the fish tank, God observes all of this and looks at all of this and interferes in all of this in a manner that only He understands. We don't have the faculty to understand it. But what it does in the end is that it doesn't matter if it's past, present, or future. It all happens in the same instant to God. And what matters at the end of the day is that the byproduct in the end, the result of all of these things, is shared by both God's agency and human agency. He created the tests that generated the choices. He created the choices, in other words. But it is us that will select A, B, or C, or D, or any of the available choices for us.
I do want to get into this connection between the choice, the sharing of the choice. But first I need to ask, how does this impact the idea of praying, dua, and calling to God and asking Him to change things, etc.?
In fact, this is the only way the idea of praying to God would make sense. If all the happenings of the universe are determined directly by God in this pure fatalistic fashion, then there would be no amount of human words that would sway God from carrying out His own plan and executing His own plan. And if all choices are made by us, and God is a mere spectator, then what's the point of asking Him for help? It's just me, I can just do whatever I want. The only way it would make sense for us to ask God for help if the choice is shared by both us and God. So you're basically saying, Lord, I have these 5 choices for me to to make, I am leaning to choice number one, but I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 are better. Can I ask for help? Guide my heart so that I select a choice that would be conducive to happiness or fulfillment or a better path or a better course for me. And that in Islamic tradition is what is called hidayah. So you pray and God answers your prayer by saying, okay, fine, you know what? I'll inspire you to choose 3 instead of 1 because that's better for you. That is the answering of the prayer, basically.
Just an aside, it reminds me of istikhara. I'm looking forward to the course on the philosophy of istikhara, actually.
I don't know if we're going to offer such thing, but there's a theology of istikhara, not the philosophy
Let's
of
go
istikhara.
for it. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
So did the scholars describe this idea of shared choice? Did they give it a name? Did they give it a perspective? And who is it that we can look to for more guidance on this?
So Islamic theologians, have disagreed greatly on these matters, and we've seen extremes that thank God went extinct over time. So between some theological groups that would make it look like human beings have absolutely no choice whatsoever, and we are just leaves carried by the wind. Versus other extremes where it is made to look like human beings are in full, absolute, utter control of their own choices. Neither of these perspectives, help us here.
Right. Neither of this helps.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't. And one of the greatest perspectives I think that many of us Muslims today, owe so much to is the Ash'ari theological school of thought, right, and their perspective on this particular matter. And the Ash'aris basically argue for the doctrine of acquisition, the doctrine of kasb, where God creates or generates choices for us, but it is we that select one choice or the other. So the outcome every single time is shared by both us and God. And in this particular understanding, I can feel the presence of God and the agency of God, and I appreciate that. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be by myself. At the same time, I can also ask for help because I know that God can and will interfere. And ultimately, I also still feel that my free will matters, and I can use my own agency to select one thing or the other. So I will be held accountable for these choices, and I feel good. And if I did something good, I will feel good. And if I did something bad, I will feel responsible. Without that, it just doesn't work.
So I just want to paint a kind of a complete picture as far as I understand it. So there's qada, God's unchanging, unaltering laws of the universe, the rules of this fish tank which will never be adjusted. And then there is the qadr of God, which is like you said, the divine fine-tuning. These are the little moments of a trial, the little moments of a test. Little things can become that trial, that test. And then we are given choices based on each of those little moments, that in each moment we can do something slightly different. Right?
Exactly.
We see the hummingbird, we can be late to work by 5 minutes, be late to work by 30 minutes or an hour, or we can just get to work on time and still take it in. And there's other choices as well. There's perhaps many, many choices. But in each of those moments, we make a choice, and God is the one who created the choice. And so kasb means that we're the ones that chose a choice that was created by God.
We acquired a choice that was already created by God. He created multiple choices for us, but we selected one on our own with our own free will.
Yeah, this is really incredible and really, really holistic. But I do feel that it presents for us one very serious problem, and this is the idea of evil. And I think it takes form in the problem.
The problem of evil is very, very serious.
Right, a problem that has shaken the faith of so many, and it seems to still be present in this formulation. It means essentially that actions that are evil were also created by God. Those choices were also God's creation, and really all I did was acquire that particular action.
See, the amount of intellectual effort and conceptual effort that we would have had to put in order to address the problem of evil without the groundwork of qada and qadar would have been so prohibitive and astounding. The problem of evil, however, becomes much easier to address once you've talked about qada and qadar, and once you've addressed the Islamic perspective on God's will versus free will, it actually becomes quite simple and straightforward to understand.
So what I'm saying is that qada and qadr means God created evil, and you're saying no, this actually made it easier for us to solve this issue?
100%. And here's the thing, when we say the word evil, right, we need to distinguish between two things, because people look at certain different acts as evil.
Right.
They look at natural disasters and avalanches and mudslides and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and floods and so forth. They look at that as evil. And they also look at human egregious actions as evil.
Atrocities committed by people.
Exactly. War crimes, rape, child molestation, murder, they also look at that as evil. So we really need to separate, what's the word? Inconvenient actions that are caused by God and inconvenient actions that are caused by other human beings.
And we're not talking about like the lion that eats the gazelle, for example.
Well, some people still consider that to be evil, actually.
Right.
Some naturalists use that as an evil act to suppose that, God doesn't exist because the world is so filled with this violence and this evil, and lions are eating gazelles and stuff like that.
Horrible lions.
Right.
These lazy gazelles that can't get away.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So we have to distinguish between the two realms.
Yeah.
And I want to focus first on man's actions.
Plenty of evil there.
And there's people will say that plenty of evil there. You're saying that God created 5 choices and that man has to select one of them. What if 3 of the 5 choices are evil and man ended up selecting option number 1, which is evil? That means God created evil. Why would a loving God create evil? I was like, slam the brakes. Wait a second. What is the definition of evil? All actions on earth in and of themselves don't have a moral value to them. They don't have any moral characterization. They are not inherently good, they are not inherently evil either, right? Take, for instance, eating an apple. Is eating an apple good or bad?
If you stole it, it's horrible.
But see, you had to qualify it with a precondition. The act itself of eating an apple is a morally neutral act. It's good for your health, maybe, but that's pretty much it. We don't say anything else about it. But if I stole this, then I would say this is an immoral or evil act.
Okay.
And if I bought it with money, then I would say, well, this is a good thing. You're exercising your rights. Taking a life, for instance. If you take someone else's life in a legitimate war, you're fighting an enemy, defending something sacred and something good and beautiful and so forth, they call you a hero. And if you murder someone and take a life unjustly from an innocent human being, then that would be considered evil and immoral and so forth. Sexual relations, it's the same exact act, but if you perform that act with a consenting person who happens to be your spouse, it's celebrated. When you perform that act with someone that is unconsenting, then that would be considered rape, and so on and so forth.
Or if the 2 people are the exact same people performing the act, but in one case they made the choice to be married beforehand, versus in the other case they didn't get married.
Exactly.
And so the exact same
one of them
action,
is considered extramarital relations, and the other one is considered intimacy in marriage. One is looked down upon, the other one is celebrated.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that there is no such thing as an act that is in and of itself inherently evil. Every act is characterized as evil or good depending on the context. So whatever it is, going back to the 5 choices, whatever it is that God generated in terms of choices, these choices are not good or evil. They're just choices. It is what you do with them and when and how and under which circumstances and which context that would render that choice good or evil, which still makes it your responsibility.
And somebody will say, well, hold on, God, it's not just 5 choices. It'd be like 638 choices, and 600 of them are evil. Doesn't that make a difference?
Again, it's not that 600 of them are evil. All of them are just choices, but 600 of them, if chosen under a certain context, they would be characterized as evil. And if chosen under a different context, they would be characterized as good. In fact, this applies to every single choice that we make in this life. Remember, the guy from earlier was watching the hummingbird. Perhaps he is watching the hummingbird with his own bare eyes. Perhaps he's looking at the hummingbird through the lens of the camera. Perhaps he is looking at the hummingbird from the scope of his gun.
And he shoots the bird.
And then he shoots the bird.
He's a horrible person.
Automatically, the whole thing becomes,
Evil.
a dramatic act of evil.
Yeah.
Okay? But looking at the bird in and of itself was not necessarily moral or immoral. Okay? And so it doesn't matter how many choices. It could be 1,000 choices.
Right.
Every single one of them lacks any moral attribution without the context and the choice that the human being makes. And so free choice matters so much to God. And he gave it to us as a gift, and he enables us to choose from the finite list or set of choices on our own, and then we choose to do something bad. Instead of holding the human being accountable, we hold God accountable for this?
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Why can't we take responsibility for evil acts that exist within the realm of man?
Right, and that very same context, the man who is looking through the scope is looking at the hummingbird and shoots it, we would say this is evil. If he's looking through the scope at an enemy who poses an incredible danger to humanity and pulls the trigger, that pulling of the trigger is suddenly not evil.
Or if you're looking at the hummingbird through binoculars and not necessarily the scope of a sniper rifle.
I think this is a really powerful idea, that context and the choices within the context are what make them evil choices or great choices, celebrated choices, heroic choices.
Right. And when you think about it, what does it take for us to eliminate the possibility or potential of evil choices in the world?
Yeah, so that was one of the things I was going to ask is, can God just eliminate all evil choices?
What does it take for that to happen? What does he need to do in order for all the evil choices to be eliminated from the world?
You would have to eliminate free will.
You would have to suspend free will completely.
Yeah.
Would we be happy with that? For God to turn us into drones, or for God to turn us into robots, and we just do what we're programmed to do, that completely rids us of our very humanity.
Because even if he leaves us with just one choice, we'll get creative enough to find an evil context within which to perform that one choice.
Or we'll just become like the lion and the gazelle, just acting upon our base instincts, for survival. We don't have any moral accountability. We're essentially not human anymore.
Right.
So this is the cost. This is the price. The price of free will is that some of us will use their ability to make choice in order to generate or to choose really bad things. And we just have to accept that is part of the deal.
And therefore,
that's what happens in the fish tank.
Right.
There is always a jerk of a fish, it's swimming with us.
A little shark
in the fish tank. There's always a shark, right?
Yeah. Okay, so this is the actions of man, and there is accountability. Also, Islamic doctrine. We could spend another episode perhaps on that, but I want to also talk about natural disasters, the actions. The happenings, the inconveniences, but they're far more than inconveniences.
And those are directly coming from God.
Absolutely, it's nature, God, it's qada, it's the laws that God has set on this universe. It's not even really qadr many times.
Right. There's a couple of things to say here. Number one, let me start with a question. What is it really that bothers us so much about natural disasters? Is it when there is a wildfire, for example, in a forest, what bothers us? It's not that the trees are burning. It's not that there's smoke in the sky. What bothers us the most about natural disasters? It's the potential for what?
It's the loss of life.
Exactly. It's the potential for death. It's the potential for the loss of life. So I want to take, for example, a flood as an example of a natural disaster.
Right.
In a flood, water overflows from the riverbank and breaks through levees, destroys homes, elderly people, little kids, stuff like that. There's a human toll.
Right.
Here's the thing. Every single day, people drown in rivers or not.
People do.
Every single day, young or old, die or not.
They do.
Minor floods happen here and there that we don't hear about in the news, happen every single day or not.
Right, but the flood is different, right? Because there's a ton of people all at once.
So what bothers us about natural disasters then is not necessarily the idea of death or the fact that children or the elderly died. What bothers us about natural disasters is the sheer number of people dying at the same time, at the same place.
This is the
And that seems
issue.
like a sentimental thing. Like,
can you explain what you
prove
mean?
to me why is it that 100 people dying in the same place at the same time is more evil than 100 people dying from the same cause, but over 1 week, over 17 countries.
Right, it's the perceived concentration of the death.
That's it.
Right.
And there is no logical argument that would make this death worse than that death.
So 100 people died in a flood, but on that same day, thousands and thousands of people
100,000 people died from other sources in far worse accidents.
Right.
Why is this look to me like it's more evil than God taking the souls of 100,000 other people in other places?
Well, I'll tell you why, because it's on the news.
That's
in front of our
exactly what it
face.
is. You know, this is, you know about it and you feel upset about it because it is emphasized in the news. If it's left out from the news, you won't even think about it and it won't bother you. Yet it will still continue to happen every single day.
Yeah, I don't remember the last news story that I heard, which just took the number of people that died in traffic accidents across planet Earth in one day.
It won't even be news. Like,
Right.
nobody would care.
Right.
But if 50 people died in some freak traffic accident in one intersection in LA, this will become news right away.
Right.
The value of life is the same.
Right.
The aspirations and futures of those people is the exact same thing. The loss is the same. Why are we more upset about this, than that? I think that's arbitrary and therefore is negligible.
There is still one unanswered question here in natural disasters or otherwise. It's the question of pain. It's the question of suffering. Fine, people die, and sometimes those deaths are concentrated and sometimes they're not. It's all about perspective. But pain, the individual suffering pain, this
What's
still
wrong
seems
with
to be
pain?
an issue.
Why are we so
innocent
upset
people
about pain?
are suffering. Innocent people suffer pain.
We suffer pain all the time, willingly and unwillingly. You suffer pain when you get on the treadmill. You suffer pain when you restrict your diet.
No pain, no gain, huh?
No pain, no gain. You suffer from pain when you try to study for upcoming exams and go on for sleepless nights, trying to get your master's and your PhD.
But that's pain I chose. What about pain that I didn't choose? The pain that is inflicted.
But pain that you did not choose sometimes is actually better for you than the pain that you chose. What pain reminds you that you are alive. Pain reminds you that there is value and meaning to this world. Pain actually reminds you what it means to experience pleasure. Without pain, the sweetness of pleasure would be absolutely meaningless for us. Some of the people that are most corrupt are also most pampered and spoiled because they experience no pain. Therefore, no amount of pleasure means anything to them. Forest fires, may cause some loss of life, but at the end of the day, it makes the soil stronger. It destroys some of the older trees. It makes it extremely fertile. It provides carbon monoxide that is needed by the leaves. It invites more forms of life. It creates balance. It's actually good for the earth. The natural disasters represent the process by which the earth restores its balance. The imbalance is more often than not actually caused by man. And when the earth tries to restore its balance, we blame God for it.
Yeah.
Again, that, for me doesn't make much sense.
And pain, the necessity of pain, especially in the contrast with pleasure. The removal of pain is in a way the removal of pleasure.
And the removal of life.
Right.
Really.
Right. Well, this has been an incredible conversation again. I do just want to add at the very end that observing hummingbirds is definitely far more enjoyable when you're having chai rather than coffee.
I will grant you that for now.
Thank you so much. I'd like to have one point in this argument.
All right.
Thanks again, Imam.
Thank you so much.